One of the most enduring characters of modern cinema is the severely obsessive-compulsive writer Melvin Udall, played by Jack Nicholson in As Good as It Gets. The scene in the 1997 film that gives the movie its title is when Melvin makes an unscheduled visit to see his psychiatrist, and the doctor refuses to see him unless he actually schedules an appointment and comes at the right time. Forced to leave without getting his way, the frustrated writer stops in the crowded waiting room, looks around, and says to all those people who are obviously waiting for their chance to come and talk to their therapist, and said, "What if this is as good as it gets?" The assumption being that anyone who has bothered to go and see a psychiatrist is somehow profoundly dissatisfied with life, but they're stunned by the suggestion that maybe it's not going to get any better. Maybe this is as good as it gets. At that point, do you compromise with the universe when you just accept that this is as good as it's going to get, and you pitch your tent and sit down and accept the way things are? A great deal of spiritual guidance teaches us that contentment comes from being able to give up your desires. Buddhism's noble truths revolve around the belief that all suffering comes from unfulfilled desires. And the way out of suffering, the resolution to the difficulty of life, is to empty yourself of all anticipation, all desire, all sense that the universe owes you anything at all. In religion, as well as in business, there is a popular proverb that says, "The perfect is the enemy of the good." Our insistence on perfection sets us up for conflict, for personal failure, and for deep disappointment and depression. So there is a certain pervasive wisdom that says, yeah, this is as good as it's going to get, so quit your whining. Accept that the world is not perfect. Scott Peck, the author of The Road Less Traveled, often said that the greatest truths are often expressed in paradox. I just wanted to say that before you decide that I'm either hypocritical or schizophrenic. I don't disagree with the core teachings of Buddhism. I think that suffering largely comes from unrealized expectations, and that the way out of suffering is to give up those expectations. My first book was about the spiritual disciplines of Christian monasticism, in which I spent quite a few pages praising the virtue of living life very simply with our appetites under control. But there is a paradox, on the other hand, aspect to this view. The struggle that took Jack Nicholson's character to his psychiatrist's office in the first place was that his comfortably reclusive life as a successful writer was being challenged by the fact that he'd fallen in love with a waitress at the diner where he liked to eat breakfast. And that everything about him, with those problems that he had, falling in love, was implausible, impractical, and it was impossible to see how that could work for a man who had the kind of OCD issues that he had, that also made him a very successful writer, that would allow him to actually have a successful love relationship. He couldn't possibly hope to be both. Now, over the years, I've found a number of fairly clever ways of changing the conversation so that I could talk about Soren Kierkegaard. This would be no exception. If there was a philosopher in the last 2 centuries who was more of a genius than Kierkegaard was, I have no idea who it would have been. But Kierkegaard did one really stupid thing in his life. He was deeply and hopelessly in love with Regine Olsen. And so Kierkegaard studied Regine. He wanted to know what she liked to eat. He wanted to know what her favorite color was. He wanted to know what she liked and didn't like about fashion, about art, about music. He wanted to completely understand her before he attempted to enter into a courtship with her. And that technique worked. She felt understood. and she fell madly in love with Kierkegaard. They became engaged to be married, and Kierkegaard found himself at that difficult crossroad, that his severe depression, the pain of his depression, is what prompted him to be the writer and thinker that he was. But he could not be married to someone that he loved and make her happy, give her a decent life, if he spent his life in severe depression. That he was either going to have to solve the emotional problem or give up the idea of getting married. And so he broke off the engagement, and he moved to Berlin, where he thought he was going to give her a chance to get over him. What happened in Berlin, however, was that he found he couldn't get over her. He wrote 2 books struggling with the notion of, can you lead a purposeful life and lead a happy married life? So he wrote the book Either Or, about you're going to fail one way or the other. Then he wrote a book saying basically the same things, and ironically he titled that book Repetition, because it was. And at the end of those 2 years, he decided that he would go back to Copenhagen and try to rekindle his love relationship with Regine. When he got back to Copenhagen, he discovered that she had married another man. She evidently hadn't read his books. Many years later, after both Kierkegaard and Regine's husband had died, Regine was interviewed by a magazine reporter, and she told him that she had never stopped loving her Abbe, Søren Abbe Kierkegaard. But they were good Danish Lutherans, and so the fact that they remained in love with each other for their entire lives was never mentioned. She had married Schlegel, Frederick Schlegel, and they never brought up the fact that they were in love with each other. Many of Kierkegaard's books are simply too complex for a normal person to comprehend. But his personal journal, which he never expected to be published, was almost entirely unguarded in his self-expression. If you're interested in Kierkegaard and you want to read Kierkegaard, start with his journal, because there's no doublespeak there. There's no, he wrote under a pseudonym most of the time. And so there's no trying to hide what he was really saying. When he wrote in his journal, he was writing out of his own personal experience. And it was in his journal, after the painful realization that he had placed Regine forever beyond his grasp, that he wrote these words: "To cheat oneself out of love is the greatest deception, of which there is no reparation in either time or eternity." Or to put that in more modern parlance, to make a compromise with life in which you live without true love is a mistake for which there is no second chance, either in this life or in the next. Now, it's a sad story, but it's a profound one. The hardest decision Kierkegaard ever faced was his choice between his life as a philosopher or to indulge his heart in true love. He became the most influential philosopher of modern times, and yet in his own journal, he acknowledged that he made the wrong choice. And in his case, he never chose again. He didn't try to start over with somebody else. He had been in love, and he turned his back on it, so he would never try again. Now, if I'd lived in 19th century Copenhagen, I might have tried to encourage him to join Match.Danish, but he died a very solitary life. I took for our wisdom text today this little-known poem by Ezra Pound that probably would have been much better known if he hadn't been even more screwed up than Kierkegaard ever dreamed of being. Odd that a seriously messed up, fascist, anti-Semitic poet would write the most insightful love poem, but here it is. Line by line in commission, he piles up the crushing imagery of people who have sold themselves short, who have settled for the tepid, the mediocre, the stifling restrictions of bondage to a relationship that robs them of the opportunity of experiencing life more deeply. Defiantly, he calls out to everyone who will hear his songs to defy all forms of religious and social inhibition, that he says, finally, all forms of mortmain, the hand of death. Religious and social rules around love relationships are, at a certain level, necessary to encourage stable families and civil harmony, but the idealistic passion of Kierkegaard's value of love and Pound's uncompromising voice also deserve a place in the conversation. That being said, there are very few things that make me as personally angry as when a married person schedules a counseling appointment with me and they begin by telling me that they are unhappy, because that usually implies that it's their partner's fault. Now, there are reasons to be unhappy in marriage. I apply the 4 horsemen test to those conversations. I ask, has there been an incident of physical violence? Has there been infidelity? Has there been child abuse? Or is there addiction in the household? And if not, I don't give much space to the musical beds approach to finding happiness. I'm not saying that there are not other reasons beyond violence, infidelity, child abuse, or addiction to end a relationship, but I am saying that happiness, meaning, real love, is not something that you find. You either create it in cooperation with another person, or it does not exist. As the great American philosopher, W.C. Fields, advised, if at first you don't succeed, try again, then quit. No sense making a damn fool out of yourself. My frustration comes in seeing people move so quickly to compromise without ever really trying, without ever really giving the ideal a shot. Now, as a single person observing the world of married people, I know I can become deeply frustrated by people who just don't seem to be trying to make their relationship the kind of love that they know that they want. I watch people jockeying around in families, playing power games and control games, trying to make sure that they don't have to give more than their share. They don't have to bear more of the responsibility than their share, that they're not being taken advantage of, that they're not losing control over their partner. And so there are these horrible games I see people playing, all of which is just like pouring poison right into your own breakfast cereal. It takes 2 people to make a relationship work. It cannot be one-sided. Still, a lot of us in the universe of single people would have loved to have had a chance at a healthy relationship if only there was someone on the tennis court on the other side of the net that would hit the ball back. I'm not single because I never had a chance to marry. Getting married is easy enough, but having been married unsuccessfully, I've been resolved to never settle for anything less than the potential of a partnership that would be worthy of a poet writing about it. And I will not trade off the potential of something that is noble and deep and powerful in order to simply avoid being alone. And having been more than a casual observer of the institution of marriage, I have seen how alone you can be while living in shared space. So when I say to those of you who are married or who live in a domestic partnership that I believe that it is your spiritual duty to go and make love, I'm not trying to be in any way crass or sexual. At least in this context, to make love is to do the things that create real love. Don't just try to endure being married. Don't find compromises that just keep you out of divorce court. Don't be so self-involved that all you are doing is posturing and playing power games. You know the path to the goal that you desire. You know that you have to forgive. You have to allow yourself to be vulnerable. You have to take the initiative to start a conversation, to listen, to make them feel safe in your affection, cherished and treasured, you know that you can get to where you want to be if you will just do it. If you can let go of your resentments. You can't get there carrying your resentments or seeking revenge. You don't get revenge and true love at the same time. Is this, in fact, as good as it gets, where you are right now? If not, what do you need to do to make it better, stronger, more joyful, more passionate, more meaningful, more fulfilling? And if you have some clue about how to do that, what are you waiting for?
You've been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at Reverend Dr. Ray at AOL.com for more information.